Welcome to the jungle and welcome to the 1970s. This week on Hell of a Picture we go Best Picture hunting with the 1978 classic, The Deer Hunter. I open up the show this week by talking about Michael Cimino, the film's director, and his dubious war record, while Dave tells us about the difficulties of shooting during a military coup. We debate the need for historical accuracy on screen, the central metaphor of Russian roulette in the film, and the significance of the ending. In Soviet Russia, roulette plays you. Sorry, I had to try. That's this week on Hell of a Picture. Welcome to Hell of a Picture, a weekly movie podcast where we discuss an unforgettable film, and if it truly is a hell of a picture. My name is Andrew Bartlett. I'm sitting across the internet, as I do each and every week, from the Bruce Dickinson to my Blue Oyster Cult, Mr. David Hollingsworth. You like that little connection?
Oh my! Wow, yeah, you went off. Well, but I mean, it's off base for sure. But I see the tie-in.
Yeah.
And I love it. Do you remember? I this comes up every now and then when talking SNL lore with people. You and I were together for the airing of that skit. Yeah, we were in when your dad was living on just off Logie Bay Road, and we were staying there one night, and that skit aired, and you and I, probably like 6 Pepsis deep, were just rolling off the couch laughing. And like, it felt like you were watching a moment of history. It was such a good skit, so freaking funny. And you knew like this was going to be legendary. And sure enough, it was like, and oh man, incredible.
Man, I love that you remember that. I have no recollection of that, but but I believe you. And that sounds about right. And the Bruce Dickinson, the Christopher Walken has said that Will Ferrell ruined his life because people just come up to him all the time and just shout for him to give them more cowbell. When I was thinking about the comparison to make this morning, I was like, okay, so the 2 main characters in the movie we're doing this week, there's like Nick and Mike. And I'm like, I can't just be Nick and Mike. And then I started thinking about Christopher Walken and of course, Bruce Dickinson and Blue Oyster Cult. He's like, some would say that he's most famous for this movie we're about to discuss, but other people would argue maybe it's from his SNL skit.
There's a good case to be made. Yeah, there's a strong case to be made. I thought you might go with Linda, and I was fine with that. If I had been Linda, I would be okay. Meryl Streep is, I didn't know she was in this, and a young Meryl Streep. She was always great, man. She must have been 20-something years old here, and already she's an absolute force, and just really incredible.
She's amazing, and we're getting into it this week with The Deer Hunter. On a run of Oscar movies, we're into the 1970s, and The Deer Hunter, which came out in 1978, a controversial and really well-respected film about the Vietnam War. And we're going to get into a big discussion on it today, and we might have some interesting opinions on this film. So, this was the first time for you watching this, right, Dave?
Yeah, I can promise you opinions. I cannot promise you interesting opinions, but I will say opinions. Yeah, first time for me, and interesting to watch a movie like this for the first time because it is so hallowed to some people, and also I would say reviled by others. I mean, maybe that's a little strong, but it is divisive. Like there are some people who are not big fans of The Deer Hunter for a number of reasons, which we will touch on. But yeah, I only knew it as a revered film. I knew it was a Best Picture. I knew it was on the AFI list. I knew people thought of it as this kind of monument to challenge in filmmaking, like and performance and grit and things like that. So it's interesting going into a film like that, feeling that you're supposed to love it, which can skew things. Yeah. So anyway, we'll come to all that in due course. But suffice to say, I think a good conversation to follow.
Absolutely. Well, let's get right into it. Let's start with what we start with every week, and that's the rundown to catch people up on The Deer Hunter.
The rundown. Now, when the working day is done, foundry workers just want to have fun. And by fun, I mean get drunk, go to a wedding, continue drinking, drive to the mountains, go hunting while drinking, and then go to Vietnam where a nightmarish POW experience awaits. Yes, friends Michael, Stevie, and Nick ship out to Nam with all the verve and ignorance that only young men are capable of. In America, they will leave behind friends, family, wives, and girlfriends. But what will they return to, if they return at all? What will they take home with them from the war? And what will they leave behind? The Deer Hunter was released in 1978 and directed by Michael Cimino. It stars Robert De Niro as Michael, Christopher Walken as Nick, Meryl Streep as Linda, John Savage as Stephen, John Cazale as Stan, and George D'Souza as John, and Chuck Aspegren as Axel. Quite the ensemble cast here. And I think all of them bear mentioning because they were important. I think everyone's important in this movie. Now, at the 79 Oscars, The Deer Hunter would receive 9 nominations and come away with 5 wins. Film editing, sound, Best Supporting Actor for Walken, Best Director for Cimino, and of course, Best Picture. Now, for the top honor, it defeated such films as Heaven Can Wait, Midnight Express, An Unmarried Woman, and Coming Home. Now, this last one is also a story of Vietnam veterans and the challenges they face reintegrating to society. It's basically the same movie, except where one has a haunting depiction of forced Russian roulette, the other contains lurid sex scenes with Jane Fonda and Jon Voight. I guess the Academy thought the latter was the more challenging performance, as they awarded Jon Voight the Oscar for Best Actor over De Niro. And that is your rundown.
Just driving around in Jon Voight's car.
I'm sure John misspelled his name. I often spell Jerry with a G and an I.
And an I.
Jon Voight.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So this was sort of the this is sort of like in the height of these sort of run of Vietnam movies, like big epic Vietnam movies. There's no shortage of them. Obviously, it's a divisive war that many people, especially in America, sort of struggle with, like, their role in, and the validity of it. You have movies like Platoon and Apocalypse Now, and then sort of The Deer Hunter, then later The Born on the 4th of July. There is this sort of strong run of Vietnam movies. So when this film came out in 1978, it was, I guess, co-written and directed by Michael Cimino, as you mentioned. And first off, that's sort of where I want to start today with Cimino. And a lot of times when a movie of this magnitude, that's sort of like you mentioned, is on AFI lists and sort of is renowned, you sort of get this director that has a run of films. You think about, we did Lawrence of Arabia last week, and it's like David Lean has this long list of movies. We did, we haven't talked about The Godfather, but Francis Ford Coppola has this run of movies. It's like directors and artists have these like long string of movies sort of in the peak of their career. Michael Cimino really didn't do much outside of this movie.
Well, he tried.
He tried. Yeah. So it's like, he did like the Silent Running, Magnum Force, and then he did this film, which he just got, people fell in love with and threw money at him, and then he attempted to do this other movie called Heaven's Gate, which I've never seen, but was at the time considered to be an absolute legendary box office bomb and failure, and just like absolutely went over budget, and there was like fights on set, and that sort of started, I think, with The Deer Hunter. there's lots of these stories from him, like a hellish shoot during the Deer Hunter, going over budget and just these long 20 plus hour days of shooting. And it raised the question for me, like, what do you think the difference is between sort of like this, like a hellish director or an incredible genius? And like, where's that line? And is it justified when you make sort of a film that ends up becoming sort of revered as the Deer Hunter?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess sometimes the line is in the results. If
Yes.
you achieve something great, then it's justifiable. It's Machiavellian in that way. The ends justify the means. But if there are no ends, or if there are disappointing ends, then you're an asshole. So, I mean, I am personally of the mind, when it comes to any kind of work, whatever, you can achieve great things being nice to people. I always believe that there is always room for diplomacy when working with people. Their collaboration and cooperation. Like, there are people who seem to think that a dictatorial approach is required, and that you have to get angry at the work to make it work. I do not believe that, and so I am not someone who will be apologist for people who are nightmares to work with, no matter what they achieve, because I think you can get it done without being a jerk.
Yeah, in Cimino's case, I think he had a vision for the film, and as I was mentioning earlier, they sort of were right behind schedule right off the hop. There was all the stuff in the wedding. It was supposed to be 20 minutes. You're supposed to get this prologue of about 20 minutes of stuff, and he shot so much, like in the church and in the reception, just these long hours. People in the heat, the scorching heat of like the middle of summers when they shot it, ended up being about 50 minutes of actual runtime in the film.
Yeah.
It's just like he would do shot after shot after shot after shot. He just continued with this, and the first cut of the film ended up being over 4 hours long. Apparently, the producers and the people in the first screening were not pleased with it. And then you have all this stuff that happened when they were filming on location in Thailand as well.
Yeah, well, actually, one of the things that I read about the filming in Thailand, so they're given some props and supplies by the Thai army, because obviously there's a lot of
right.
It's a war movie. They had to briefly return those because the military comes to them and we're like, "Hey, we got to stage this coup, so can we just get those guns back? We're gonna kill a bunch of people on Sunday. You'll have everything back by Monday." And like, I'm saying this very glibly, but that's kind of how it went down, apparently.
Like, oh my gosh!
And it's amazing. Like, this coup that took place in October when they were shooting was preceded only months earlier by another attempted coup in March. So a very tumultuous time to be filming in Thailand. They went there because it was safer than Vietnam, but boy, that is something, I tell you.
Yeah, and then there's also this story I read about this New Yorker article. So after he made the cut of the film, they hired this marketing company to kind of promote the film and get it ready, sort of for a wide release. And this the marketing firm hired a guy, got this interviewer from the New Yorker to come interview Cimino, and he claimed that the film was autobiographical from his life as a Green Beret medic, and from when he was like, and he had enlisted, in the 60s and just never ended up going for whatever reason. So the guy who's in the part of the marketing team was like, knew that wasn't true. He was like, that is. So the New Yorker guy calls him and is like, hey, Cimino told me this. It was like, can you validate that? And he's like, yeah, let me get back to you. He calls up his boss of of the agency, which was Lou Wasserman, which is like this huge boss of this talent agency or whatever. And he had all these connections to the government. So he actually called up the government, or there's no proof of this, but essentially the marketing guy gets this number from the Department of Defense from Lew Wasserman. Lew Wasserman's like, let me make some calls. He's like, tell the reporter to call this number and they'll validate it. So he gives them this number. The reporter calls the Department of Defense and the Pentagon, and they vouched for Cimino that it was all valid and true. So it was like they ran it in the New Yorker article, and it like claimed it to be, they got proof or whatever.
Wow.
But it was just like, it was just like straight up lie, like actually never happened.
So then how does it come out afterwards that it is a lie? Like, I mean, like was it?
Oh, I think it was like years had passed or whatever, or like that people were like, no, he was never a Green Beret in the, like people like, when you become a famous person, obviously people are looking into you and they see this stuff about him in a New Yorker article and whatever. And I mean, it was never proven, whatever, but Lew Wasserman had all these connections in with the government in Washington.
Wow.
So it's just like these blatant lies, and it was
and cover up too. That's pretty wild. Like, man, yeah, that's some clout.
That was all for the promotion of the film.
Wild. Yeah, I know that. But, I had seen that. Yeah, like there had been this New Yorker article and it had been proven false. I didn't know about the elaborate, attempts at covering it up and falsifying the records. That's really fascinating. But on the subject of that, the screenwriter, Derek Washburn, would say of Cimino, and I'm quoting here, he lied to everybody about everything. I don't think he ever knew where the truth was. And so, that tells you something about the man. And, beyond the horror of war and the trials of reconfiguring to peace, it doesn't seem like the truth is really of any interest to this film. Because it certainly doesn't take time to humanize the Vietnamese anyway. Like they are villains only in this movie, barbarous and cruel. And,
right.
That remains a valid critique of the film. It certainly was in the moment and to this day. And people compared this to the depiction of the Japanese in World War II films, after that conflict, and they're not wrong. It must be said.
Yeah, I think this is a sort of a principal issue with a lot of the movies about the Vietnam War. It's I can't argue with that. The depiction of the Vietnamese is problematic, and but I would also argue. And this isn't to justify that depiction, but I'd argue that the story really isn't about that. And it's more so about friendships and about family. And that's what sort of I got from it. Specifically these three guys. And then the three guys that are left at home. And that's why I think there's so much of that prologue. I mentioned that there was over 50 minutes of it.
Yeah.
And I think that's some of the most important parts of the film, even though that, the Russian roulette scene is sort of what people think about when they think about this movie. But I think that first half of the film is just such an interesting portrayal and depiction of sort of family and friendship. And it really sets up the impact of those later scenes.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say, in response to that is that I think other films took time to show, that there is that, to not vilify the enemy in such an obvious way. I think Platoon, you see the humanity of the people of Vietnamese being impacted by the war. I think there's an opportunity here for this movie to save itself from what it did, and it just doesn't do it. It's, I don't know. You can say, yes, it's a story about friendship and family and what happens to them. And I agree with you in that take. And there is realism in the difficulties that they have coming back from war. And yes, your experience in war can be of atrocity. And so you can have that can be real as well. But I don't know. I think as a storyteller, maybe there's a little more responsibility that you have to accept that, especially if you're talking about something that is based in history, something that is hot to the touch in history too. When this movie comes out in 78, to take a little more time and care to show more sides of it. That would be my response to that. Like I don't know, this movie could have saved itself from the criticism, I think.
Yeah, and I think like you're not wrong. I just think it's like you said, it's within the context of when the film was, right? And what was happening in America at the time. I think it was such a hot topic and such a hot, like, people were obviously up in arms about the war in general, like the Vietnam War, and I feel like films like this were just starting to broach the subject of like post-traumatic stress syndrome and like that whole idea and the effects that it has on soldiers and what that would look like, right? Like I don't think we really got so much of that, like especially the post stuff, which which is why I sort of love that structure of the film, right? You get like the pre, like you said, rah rah, can't wait to go, America, this is great, to like the atrocities, what's happening in the moment during the war, and then really the post, right? And then and what that looks like after the fact, and really not glorifying it whatsoever. So it's that there is sort of like this beginning, middle, and end that I think really flows nicely in the film.
Yeah, there is a nice symmetry to the film. I agree, and a tragic poetry to beginning with a wedding and ending with a funeral, which is kind of nice. I would say the last act is too long for me. I expect
where would you say the last act starts? Where would you think it kind of like probably when he gets back? Like you're talking about like when Mike
I guess so. Yeah,
back.
when he gets home, and then because like but then he gets home and he goes back again. So like it's sort of like it's home, so Nam, home and Nam. In the last act. I think most people would probably say that if you're trimming fat from this, you would probably cut it from the first act, shorten the wedding scene. I disagree entirely. I think the wedding is the best part of this movie. I love the detail of the ceremony. I love what we learn about the characters through it. There's a lot of subtle looks and looks away that tell the story between Michael, Linda, and Nick. And I also love the truly heroic intake of booze that goes on. The buys are animals, and it doesn't seem like they sleep or stop drinking for a second. And before piling in the car, driving off to the mountains, drinking while they're driving, I kept wondering, when are they going to show them doing a bunch of blow? Because like to do what they did without performance enhancing drugs seems impossible. But strangely enough, that is probably not the most unbelievable in this film. Maybe not even the third or fourth unbelievable thing.
Yeah, that's I love that. It's like they're just they're always boozing, just like essentially from leaving work. It's just straight up, and it's like you're getting married today. It's like they're on the booze. They're like all day, all night, just loaded. But like I said, like I love that reception, and it's like you sort of get that dynamic between, like that seems like so subtle and so like that relationship between Mike and Linda. It's sort of like this really dance that they're doing, like actually dancing, but like this like sort of back and forth. He always has a moment where he sort of like kind of kisses her, but he doesn't. And even stuff like the Stevie stuff, which is like just backs up like what happens to him later in the film, where he's like, like I can't remember his wife's name in it, but he's sort of like,
Angela. I think it's Angela.
Yeah, he's like, I never had sex with Angela, or I never slept with Angela, and he's like loaded. It's like he's like you're like, whoa, what? Like that's not your kid? Like that's you know what I mean? Like there's just sort of subtleness and like sadness to these certain moments, and then obviously then you have the whole moment between Mike and Nick on the basketball court, where Mike's like naked and he's just sort of like, don't leave me there, man, bring me back. And it's like, you're sort of thinking like he's not going to do this, and then he does bring him back home, just not obviously the way that he hopes. So there is this tragedy in the foreshadowing of the rest of the film.
Yeah, and you also get that moment, where the man and wife are drinking from that chalice together, and it's like, they say if you don't spill a drop, it's good luck forever. And of course they spill a drop, the red drop on the white dress, pretty clear imagery there and foreshadowing of what's to come.
Yeah.
Like, I like too how this kind of sets up. Well, it does set up their Russian ancestry, and it's interesting. And I wish the film was more about this, because it's fascinating that, okay, these are the children of Russian immigrants, Russian, Soviet Union. This is the stronghold of communism in the world right now, America's great enemy. And this is really the reason why America gets into Vietnam. It's very little to do with, helping the South Vietnamese. So that's how it's framed. It's about stemming the expansion of communism. And they fear communism, and they fear Soviet control. And so they want to stop its expansion. Vietnam was trying to elect the will of the country was probably to go communist, and the U.S. got involved, unjustly. I think it's fair to say.
Right.
And so the irony there that, like, here you've got these guys, sons of Russians, going to fight this war. There's a lot there which could have, I think, been an interesting exploration of humanity and perspective, and just, like, I wish there had been more about that. And I think that could have been the salvation for this movie that I wanted. And so it's kind of a bummer to me that they didn't get into that.
Well, that's interesting that you bring that up, because the idea that they're sort of all Russian immigrants and they're fighting this war against kind of communism, and it's it doesn't get lost in the idea that they're playing Russian roulette as well. That's like, they don't really say that, but it's they don't call it Russian roulette, but it's just, obviously it's Russian roulette. And that even sort of those scenes too, where they're hunting, and it's like they go hunting with all the guys, and the one shot, again, foreshadows what happens later in the film. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts on sort of the whole Russian roulette idea and the one shot, and sort of that depiction, which, say what you will about it, it's sort of a that's a lot of people will argue is a problematic aspect of the film, that's like, there's no evidence anywhere that, like, the Viet Cong were, like, playing Russian roulette with American soldiers. Mm-hmm. Now, Cimino will claim that, yes, he had read somewhere that it did happen, or he had gotten proof or whatever. But, like, for me personally, I don't think that really matters. Like, I don't look at the use of Russian roulette as, like, an aspect of, like, narrative truth. I think of it more as a sort of a metaphor or an allegory for a larger message in the film.
Yeah, undoubtedly, that is the central metaphor of the film. It does not bother me that didn't happen anywhere at any time, because, look, if it's not one war crime, then it's another. Sure. So, horrible things were done to POWs on all sides of every conflict. The war crimes are not a nationally specific thing. So, no, that doesn't upset me in any way, that is not historically accurate or true. I think it's an excellent device. It's very effective. Yeah. I mean, when you watch it, you're like, holy shit. And I don't know if I fully understand it as a metaphor, if it relates to the whole one shot thing. Like, I know, like, they're talking about one shot when they're hunting, and I'm not a hunter, but as I understand it, I think, if it's best to take something down with one shot, because it doesn't seize up and toughen the meat. And you could say it's more humane as well. It doesn't prolong the suffering. And maybe, a forced game of Russian roulette, which is famously, obviously it's one shot, it's one bullet in the chamber. If you're forced to play that, or if you're playing for money, or because you become despondent and don't care about living anymore, which is what happens to Nick, that's a terrifying and very, inhumane way to die. And I don't know if it's meant to sort of symbolize the prolonged struggle in Nam, if it's meant to talk about the randomness of war. I couldn't really come up with a super satisfying explanation. I don't know if you have anything better on it.
Yeah, I tend to think of it like, I agree that it's like that didn't bother me, that aspect of it. I thought it was such a great device to use. I also just the performances in those moments,
incredible,
from De Niro. Yeah, and it's like you know why Walken won won the Oscar. It's like in those moments, like, and when he's like crying, he's like scared in the first one, and then obviously the last one where he's just sort of just this shell of himself. And then yeah, you fucking show him, Nicky. You fucking take that shot, Nicky. You fucking tell him. And he's going full De Niro, and you're just like, man, this is fucking intense. So intense.
Yes.
And you can't help but like think to yourself, it's like, man, what the fuck would I do in that situation? Like, I have no idea.
I'd probably be like Stevie, struggling to take a piss downstairs. Like, you know what I mean?
Oh
like,
my God.
That's pretty wild too. Like, whew.
Yeah, it's just, it's brutal, man. But I was reading up on it, and I think, you know, we like to quote Raj Ebert,
your boy,
this podcast, Raj. And I think he said it best in his review of the film. He said, it is the organizing symbol of the film. Anything you can believe about the game, about its deliberately random violence, about how it touches the sanity of men forced to play it, will apply to the war as a whole. And it is a brilliant symbol because in the context of the story, it makes any ideological statement about the war superfluous. So it's like, you know, I think it just works so well in that it just brings that intensity and randomness and just like, you know, what is happening in this moment, and just, you know, and it gives it this, like, the film such a strong sort of image too, you know, with the wrap around the head and the gun. It's just such a powerful image, which I think a lot of films need to have, not just for marketing, but just like, to make them memorable, you know?
It is enduring. You're absolutely right, because obviously I had seen that without ever actually seeing that. Like, you know, it's referenced in a number of things. You see it in The Simpsons, at least on one or two occasions, I think. So yeah, it is an enduring image. And I agree with Ebert that I think the film is largely apolitical. You know, he's saying, you know, it makes any ideological statement about the war superfluous, because I don't think there is one necessarily in there. Like, you know, I think it's a pocket. This is a pocket story. You know what I mean? It doesn't concern itself with the larger narrative of why they're there, you know, the right or wrong of it necessarily. You are right in that it is about these guys and their experience. So yeah, I mean, I that is one thing I do not take any exception with whatsoever. In fact, it's something that I think is very effective and that I admire about the film.
Well, speaking of effective, what are your thoughts on the ending, like the actual ending? So you sort of have this, like, you know, I don't want to say false endings, but like the movie could end with him with the Russian roulette scene, sort of with Nicky and Mike at the end. You know, where Nicky dies, but the film carries on to his funeral. They have his funeral, and then it's like, then there's that, you know, it could end sort of there in that moment, but then it goes to the bar and they have that sort of, again, iconic moment where I had forgotten about it when I rewatched it. I was like, oh yeah, they sing God Bless America. I was like, this is super weird in my head as I'm watching it unfold. I'm like, yeah, but then it sort of hits me a bit. And I was like, yeah, this is a very bold choice in how to end the actual film. You know, this group of friends coming together and singing God Bless America.
Yeah, and bold because it could be interpreted a lot of different ways. I think
exactly.
You know, where you could take it where you want to, and I'm sure some people would say it's sort of pro-American. I don't know if it is. It might be to a degree. I definitely don't think it's pro-American involvement in Vietnam.
Yes, I agree. Yeah.
One of the few times I think the film does make a statement is when you hear the guys escaping captivity. I think it's Walken. He's saying, "We don't belong here," or "What are we doing in this damn jungle?" Something like that. So I think the position of the film is not one of support for the mission. As I said, I think it's largely apolitical. If I were to guess, I'd say it's a comment on how indoctrinated people can become with exceptionalism.
Right.
You know, they have just experienced the worst aspects of war. The worst, both for those who went to war and those who stayed home, and for everyone when people come back. The absolute worst. And there they are sitting over brunch, a post-funeral brunch, singing God Bless America. It's fucking tragic, really. Like, I mean, that, it's like, when you think about it that way.
See, that's such an interesting view on it, because while I agree, I don't think it's like a pro-American, like pro-involvement in the war at all. I think it serves as like this kind of like really pro-family moment, this coming together, through dire circumstances. They're still coming together as a family. And then there's this idea that your friends are really your family, your chosen family, right? All these people are so close that they're almost like family, and they're together, and it's this important moving forward moment. And I was reading a quote from Cimino when he was talking about when to place this moment. And, he was saying that it was important for him to have it at brunch, like you said, where and it's almost like this, it almost looks like the Last Supper. And that's obviously like very, very intentional, because it isn't the Last Supper. It's taking breakfast. And there's this idea of like breakfast, new day, new life, and they're all together.
With shots of whiskey and beer at breakfast.
Yeah.
Of course.
And I also love that moment where, where he's like, you get the coffee or whatever. And it's like this very like, just like routine thing of it. And they're all just like, it felt very natural, like in this moment, like
it did.
Like just, it felt so real. And then you have that moment when I think his name is it John, the guy who's the chef at the bar, because I mix him and
that's John. Axel, him and Axel you get confused Axel, with, but John and Axel.
So when John, and he goes in the back and he starts making the eggs, and it's like that moment is so, like you said, it's just so sad. And he's just like, because you never live with those guys really. You get a bit of like a bit of the Stanley character and like what he's like, and then the two other, like I said, I'm mixing them up, but like, God, you get that moment of this, and even beforehand, you get that moment with him when he's like, if it wasn't for my, I don't know if he says his like leg or something, but
his knees, he's
like,
I'd be there with you. Yeah, he had bone spurs, like another famous draft dodger. Yeah,
it's right. Yeah, bone spurs. Amazing. Yeah, it's that's such a great moment, and we get us getting that moment. I think is such a I don't know. It's just I love that, sort of stuck out to me, but.
It was touching. I agree with you entirely. And not until The Fast and the Furious would we again see a greater depiction of the value of family. And so you might say that Fast and the Furious is our Deer Hunter.
Yes, you might say. Man, forget about Cuz.
Bro, I love Fast and the Furious. We could do the whole saga, and I would be tickled pink.
The great thing about the Fast and the Furious is like each one is kind of different up until I think it's like 4 or 5, and then they just sort of kind of merge all into each other. But
yeah, you could say that. Yeah. But someone who's watched them with a more meticulous eye might point out some key differences. But we will get into that when we do the Fast saga, which we will.
Man,
I'm at
Deer Hunter, the Fast and Furious of its generation.
That's right.
That's right. All right, so let's get into I'm definitely interested to hear you have differing opinions on this film, and I want to know if you think this is a hell of a picture.
So yeah, like I'm not saying that you have to show the totality of something in every story, particularly something as immense as Vietnam. It's perfectly fine to examine a pocket of history. But like I said, there's zero nuance in this film where the conflict is concerned. Like, Nazis have been given more nuance on screen than the Viet Cong get in this movie. Like, that guy with the one lens in his sunglasses, that is basically the affectation of a Bond villain. You know what I mean? Like, if you went to war and suffered atrocities, as many people do, you can be forgiven for seeing the enemy as evil. But the truth is more complicated than that. And, I don't think there's ever been a conflict where the evil is reserved to one side, or where the barbarism is only committed by one side. And if this movie did a little more to tell us that, to to say that there is that aspect to life, or that this was a movie very much as a perspective, a one person's perspective and experience, I would be okay with it. But it doesn't. It doesn't take the chance to do that, and it has opportunity because the thing is 3 hours long. This feels almost like a caricature of a war experience that uses grit and horror to masquerade as realism. And if you're going to tell this story, I almost feel like you should pull a Tarantino. Tell us it's a fairy tale, like, because then it's like, okay, this is a departure from history, but it is still concerning itself with history. There are things to love in this film. There are great performances. The emotion is of the highest order. It is well shot. It is, there's a lot of great things in here. I didn't necessarily need 3 hours of it. I didn't. Yeah, and I don't know if I ever need to watch it again. I will say, I will not deny that it deserved the Oscar for Best Picture. I think it probably did. Now, I haven't seen a lot of the films in contention that year, but I think it is a worthy Best Oscar or a Best Picture Oscar winner. But, and this is something that I'm sort of struggling with here, I don't think it's a hell of a picture for me because I don't want to watch it again. And I need to clarify the mission statement for myself, because I've put other films on the list that I don't necessarily want to watch again. And I need to make up my mind if that's essential criterion. Because if it is, I need to rescind some of my earlier verdicts. So yeah, this is going to be part of the ongoing sort of, purpose of our series here. So I'm going to say no, not a hell of a picture, but definitely worthy of a Best Picture Oscar winner.
That's interesting you say that, because I feel like that's sort of how I felt about Lawrence of Arabia when we discussed it last week. Like, I understood the importance, but like, I don't really feel the need to watch it again. But I think during our conversation, you sort of, not you convinced me, but I was sort of like, yeah, I think it is a best hell of a picture. But, like we said, sort of at the very beginning of this podcast, we're sort of like, at the run of these, we're just trying to figure out what this means to be a hell of a picture. And we're sort of, like you said, as we go along, we're sort of fine tuning it. For me, without a doubt, this is a hell of a picture. But we both got to turn our key, so it's not a hell of a picture for the pod. But I think this is, I said to you earlier that I think this is one of my, top 10 favorite films of all time. I mean, I say that, and I think it might be, I don't know if it's a bit much because I'm just so fresh in watching it, but I'm just in rewatching, I'm just like, everything about this. Maybe it's the top 20. Because I'm like, off the top of my head, I'm thinking of like, I can already think of like 5 that I like more than this film, but I'm just like, man.
Yeah. And it depends too. Do you count the Fast Saga as one film or as 10 films, right? Because that's going to seriously upset the balance, obviously.
That's right. Yeah. It's for me, it's like, I sort of forgive the main issues that you have with the film, because I can see those and I understand those and I can appreciate where you're coming from. But for me, it's like, I just love this story of really like a friendship, and like how these guys go through this thing together and come out different on the other side, but still attempt to stay true to one another. And it really is a powerful film for me. And I love the pacing of it. And I don't hate that it's 3 hours. And I was sort of captivated the whole way, even things that like, you're going from this, it's like almost like jump cutting from a wedding to like you're in the Battle of Vietnam. There's no like, subtlety. It's like there's these jump cuts and just choices that were made in the film that really kind of make it a powerful viewing experience for me. So yeah, I definitely love it. As you were saying that, I sort of thought maybe we're almost, we're coming up on a year and a half. I don't know how many movies we've done now. 50 almost, 45. Maybe it's like at the end of the year, our first year, we do a year in review and like sort of go back and look at what we have and like let things simmer. Because I think a lot of, like you were talking about, when we discuss what a hell of a picture is, we get sort of caught up a bit sometimes on like in the moments. So I'm saying right now, like, this is one of the my top 10 favorite films. But I don't know. In a couple months, I'll probably be like, well, I love it, but I don't know if it's there, right? It's like you're a creature of the moment, sort of thing, and how we respond to these. So I think it'd be worth that.
Yeah, and for me too. Like, I mean, when something's had a chance to sit with me for a while, maybe I can warm to it, you know? So that's totally possible. And yeah, I think that's a great idea. Already off the top of my head, I think I can think of two movies that I'm sort of like, you know, did I put that on there because I felt like I was supposed to? You know, sometimes you feel like, you know, you're supposed to love things, and again, like, what are we trying to do here? Is this the objective list of best movies ever, or is it something more specific to us? Like, you know, is A Hell of a Picture something that we define? Because if it is, then I need to be stronger in that resolve and not sort of cave to historical pressure, which is something I had to fight here.
Yeah, I agree completely. Something tells me The Fabelmans is not going to be a hell of a picture for me if I.
Yeah, looking back for me, yeah,
love it, but I don't know. Anyways, we'll get to that maybe when we do our year in review. I like that.
I can promise you that my opinion on The Fabelmans has not changed. It is still a wretched pile of dog shit. So that's that I remain true to that. I'm proud of myself for not wavering.
But you know, if anything, The Fabelmans at least has that wonderful David Lynch performance. So, you know,
that's true. Yeah, absolutely.
R.I.P. Yeah. Mm-hmm. All right, so that's another episode of Hell of a Picture, and next week we continue our Oscar run into the 80s, you know, around the years when we were born, 1984, and we are doing. Oh, you want to tell everybody? It's pretty, you know, the year of the best picture we're doing was 1984.
Oh, fun. Well, that happened unintentionally, but I'm glad it did. Very serendipitous. Yeah, we're going to be doing Amadeus. And, you know, if you didn't know that Mozart died while writing the Requiem, it's in Amadeus, as Jerry told Elaine. So, yeah, I'm excited about that. I have seen this movie once, but it was a long time ago.
Yeah, me too.
And I'm very interested to watch it again. I love classical music, big listener of classical music, and the history of classical music is interesting as well. So this will be another fun one to look at, both from a narrative perspective and its historical accuracy. I know that is often debated about the film, of course.
Sure.
So, yeah, it's going to be fun. I'm excited.
Amadeus.
We're going to have to break out the Falco, obviously. Yeah.
Amadeus.
Jam.
Dr. Zaius. Okay.
that's where I was going next, of course.
Yeah. Brilliant. Yeah. But I wasn't before. I couldn't before. All right. So there you go. Amadeus next week. Be sure to watch it and catch up and
watch the episode of The Simpsons. Watch it's a fish called Selma, I think is what it's called, where she marries Troy McClure, and Troy McClure acts in the unforgettable Broadway retelling of the film Planet of the Apes. Oh, yes. The musical, Planet of the Apes.
The musical.
It's so great. Yeah.
So we're we only got a handful of we got the 90s, the 2000s, and then the 10s, and left to kind of do for this Oscar run. And we got.
Are we not going to do the 2020s? You know, the incomplete 2020s.
Yeah. So the 2020s, I think we decided. Yeah. Well, maybe. Well, we'll either do the 2020s, or we're going to potentially do a Best Picture nominee from this year, because the list will be out. So then we can kind of like take it. Yeah, and we'll see, because that'll run us up until the Oscars, I think. So we're good.
Cool.
Yeah. Sweet. All right. So for David Hollingsworth, my name is Andrew Bartlett. This has been another episode of Hell of a Picture.